How did the idea come about, and how did you acquire the rights?
Well, actually, the idea generated from Scott Free, in that they started about 10 years ago with FX, and I will pass it on to David and then maybe take it up from there.
Basically, I think 2003, we sold it with CAA because Ken Follett had really never wanted to license this as a film. He felt you needed a minimum of 6 hours to really tell the story appropriately. It was at the time Ridley was doing Kingdom of Heaven, so the sword and sandal movies were still somewhat popular in the States, though quickly on the decline. But we put it into development with the writer John Pielmeyer. We wrote a 2-hour and then a Bible, and then the head of the network left. So the project got put on the shelf. We had met around that same time, and I would say there wasn't a year that passed when Rola and I wouldn't have a discussion when she'd say, so how can we make this? So how can we make this? And the answer always was, well, this, both the format as well as the challenge of it being an historical piece made it difficult to identify a broadcaster in the US who could anchor it. And that's where it really became incumbent upon what Tandem was really able to ultimately raise and make this a reality so we could bring it back to the US.
Yeah. How did that come about? Who was your grounding force to get it done? And
Our first pillar, let's say,
our first pillar
was actually Germany, and that was ProSiebenSat 1. And the book had its own grounding. We knew that it had a success all over Europe. It was not just in Germany, it was in Spain. People knew about it in France, also in Italy, as well as England. Though in an ironic and bizarre sort of way, even though it's about a 12th century cathedral, Ken Follett didn't have a lot of support in the UK market in this book. It became much more successful in Germany and then Spain and went to other countries. When we presented it in April 2008, we got the rights. The timing was perfect because the sequel, which is 200 years later, and the sequel is called World Without End, and that book was coming out into the marketplace. So it was in Ken Follett's interest to do something with it. Otherwise, he would be launching another book and nothing would be done with the first one.
So we have people out here who are interested in one basic thing other than creativity, which is money.
And how
did you raise it? How did you get it?
It's about how to save money. And ultimately, if you bring a number of broadcasters to the table and they have a respect for the creative material and they allow you to do what you do best, which is create good programming, then they don't have to carry the full freight of the financing. And that is all over the world. We have acquisitions and we have our domestic productions all over the world. So somewhere in between, there is this thing called international co-productions. We were trying to show to people we could produce a high-quality program with the right partners that would be able to show to everybody that they don't have to pay the full freight of $40 million. They would have to make some compromises because there were other partners at the table. They would have to be respectful of the creative, and they would have to recognize that on one side, the good news is they didn't have to pay all of it, but on the, let's say, bad side, if you want to call it bad side, is that they would have to allow others to have a voice creatively.
I think the other critical component which Rola touched on that distinguished this project, at least for us, was the protection of the creative. I think we've been approached as a company, as Ridley and Tony are an international brand, and they're known for taking on some of these more ambitious pieces. But we really wanted to avoid the proverbial Euro pudding. We felt we had to deliver something that was on the scale and caliber of quality that HBO has set in our country for this type of project. And on top of that, and as Starz, who became really our most valuable partner in this, I think is establishing for themselves. And ultimately, it was making sure that we had, in a partnership with Tandem, a company that wasn't going to put the financial first. The financial had to be equal to the creative in the sense that we had to be looking at the product that we were making as the most important thing that service. Kind of like, you know, a mother and a father, and making sure that we are servicing that child.
You've got some wonderful actors, both well-known ones and some a little less well-known. How did you corral all of these folks?
It's funny, when we sat down the first time and talked about how we were doing the casting, I said to David, we're going to need to cast in a certain way that we can actually place the Slater. In other words, we will need to make sure we have actors that are known in certain countries. Obviously the UK, and obviously the US.
Again, there was an established working language because of having worked with Priscilla, who partnered with Denise Champion out of the US. And so, I mean, we solicited our casting director on Good Wife. I mean, we utilized any and everybody that we could just to get sort of the expertise within Germany, within Canada,
Yes.
As would help assure that we got the highest caliber talent possible. I mean, the key was, you know, really in his films, and certainly was our experience in the company as well, is we like organic casting. I mean, it's preferable to be authentic to sort of time and place.
You've got the rights to World Without End. You are in prep with that. What's the single biggest lesson from Pillars of the Earth will you apply to this next project?
Don't have as
if there were only one, but you were going to say?
Don't have as many interest fees. It just takes away from the screen. So in other words, try to lock down everything up front.
Just speaking to the creative,
Yes.
the lessons we learn on series television, you know, we get some of the benefit here, where through editorial we made a lot of discoveries about structurally how best to tell a story, particularly the critical importance of the first 30 to 45 minutes of the picture, and orienting an audience and at the same time hooking them into sort of the spine of your story. Pillars was incredibly ambitious, and the original screenplay really packed quite a lot of content into those first 20 minutes. And so that was a great discovery process that fortunately we had the time to explore. As we're now sort of laying out our plot and outline for World Without End, hopefully we'll show a great evolution
Yeah.
from the first experience.